Good evening! How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That is Orech Yamim. That's a song that if you go to Uman for Rosh Hashanah, and you go either to the main big minyan, the Shiner minyan with about 2,000 people, or Nekuda Tova with about 300 people, you will sing that particular melody for about an hour, and it'll feel a little bit rushed. Sing, dance, and go nuts. Originally composed, I'm pretty sure, by Shlomo Carlebach. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get together to do some beautiful and very practical and relevant learning for observant Jews? We just went through this on Sukkot and every festival. We know that we can cook on a festival. Can we light a fire? Yes and no. Not exactly. You'd think that was a simple answer, but it's never a simple answer. And tonight we're going to be exploring the ins and outs of that. Who is with us as we get together to do some learning on a Sunday night? Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, New York, Renee in Indiana, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, James in Indianapolis, Nancy in North Carolina, Pauline in Arkansas, Gwen in Michigan, John in Vegas, who's been watching the replays lately, in between saving lives, I might add. Paula in the Great Northwest, Christo in Lubbock, Texas, PK in Colorado, Bill, shalom from mid-Missouri. He had a brief COVID scare this past week, a lingering and nasty cough, but got back the results, negative for COVID, glad it's just a cold. David in Indiana, Kathy in Ohio, Paul in Chicago, Angela in Ontario. Welcome, Angela. Sarah in LA, Yehuda in South Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Chaim in Charlotte, Shalom from Beaverton, Oregon, and also from Salt Lake City, Utah with Philippine. Welcome, and Vicky in Boston and Deborah in Connecticut. Over there on the YouTube side, Aoife in Florida and Lynn in North Texas. A quick Torah thought before we get into our Talmud page. And our page tonight, what we're going to be covering of it is somewhat brief, so it should not be a long class. But a quick Torah thought. We talked yesterday about something that we had discussed in our minyan on Shabbos. How do we explain that God says to Adam and Eve, and specifically to Adam, after they eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and they're hiding from God because they realize they're naked and they're embarrassed, and God says, "Where are you?" Is there anything that is unknown to God in a limited physical world? God who is infinite and beyond all dimensions. God knows everything, sees everything, experiences everything, omniscient, omnipresent. How could God not know where Adam is? And so our explanation, one of the explanations offered is, of course, God knows where Adam is, but does Adam know where Adam is? Adam, who now realizes that he has sinned and will sin again. He's been limited in so many ways. Is he a completely fallen being destined to a much cruddier existence than he had when he was that spiritual being that, occupied the cosmos, as it were? And God saying to him, well, listen, you may have fallen, you may have made a mistake, but you are essentially still the same being that I made. You are a soul that I placed in the physical world. Where are you holding? Where are you identifying yourself? Are you identifying yourself with the sin and that you are your worst moment? Or will you take advantage of atonement, which was created even before the universe was created, and take advantage of that and identify yourself with who you really are, that soul placed into the world. And Nina reminded us that when you make an atonement, a complete atonement, a real atonement, from love and gratitude to the Creator, then even your sins are transformed into merits, a teaching we encountered earlier in the Talmud. So following up on that, we look forward 10 generations to Abraham. We haven't reached that yet in the Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is about the story of Noah, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. But I read every day. I took on, when COVID started, to read the Akedas Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac, the perplexing episode when God commands Abraham to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac, shortly after telling him that it is through Isaac that his, descendants will be blessed and bring blessing into the world. And it would seem that if he then kills Isaac, whatever God had promised him about the future would, go up in smoke, literally. So what did it mean? And okay, so we're not going to talk about the entire episode, but Abraham trusts God, knows that God is good, and is obedient to God and will do whatever God asks, even if it's this incredibly illogical and seemingly cruel and barbaric action of sacrificing his child. In fact, just what Judaism seems to be against in a world where child sacrifice was common. This would be the faith where that was absolutely prohibited. And later, when the Torah was given, it was absolutely explicitly prohibited. So what did it all mean? Abraham didn't know, but the word came from God, so he did it. And we have an understanding that Isaac also understood what they were doing when they walked up that mountain together, the father and son, after Isaac says, well, here's the fire and the wood. Where is the lamb for the elevation offering that we're going up this mountain to offer to God? And Abraham answers him, God will provide for himself the lamb for the offering. And then our sages say Isaac understood that he was the lamb. They go up, they build the altar, the fire, etc., the pile of wood, the altar, and then they bind Isaac and put him up on it. And Abraham reaches for the knife to slaughter his son. And that's when this angel of the Lord says, Abraham, Abraham, twice, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. And then here's the key line, for now I know that you fear God. Right? Now I know. And then because you have done this thing, I will bless your descendants incredibly, and your descendants will be a blessing to the world, and they will be like the sand on the sea, on the shore of the sea, etc. But this phrase, now I know, what does that mean? Is God a person? Is God a being that that goes through time linearly like we do, and at one point doesn't know something, and at the next point does know something? Do we surprise God? Isn't time going forward or backward? Isn't all of time, the whole history of this universe from beginning to end, available equally to God from God's perspective? That's how we understand God. So what could it possibly mean when God says, now I know? Rashi interprets that verse as, well, now I have what to tell the other nations when they ask why the Jewish people so special, or why the descendants of Abraham so special, because Abraham was willing to put it all on the line for his love of God. That's one reason. That's one explanation given. But the one that I learned today that was new to me was the interpretation by the commentator Seforno, who says he points to this, that God told Abraham to bring Isaac up to as an offering in the place that I will show you. And Abraham does it, binds Isaac, gets ready to slaughter him, and then an angel of God tells Abraham to stop what he's doing. Right? And from that itself, we learn that, if God tells you to kill someone, okay, then you do it because you heard directly from God. But to stop any kind of violence, especially killing, anyone can tell you, right? An angel or anybody can tell you to stop. You can only start such a terrible, cruel, violent action when you hear it from God's self. You don't hear it from God, you should not be doing something like that. But Seforno learns out that why did God send an angel to halt this sacrifice? And why does that angel say, "For now I know"? Normally we think that the angel is speaking in God's voice. He's bringing a message from God. God is saying, "Now I know." Seforno says, no, the angel is saying, "Now I know." The angels have learned. Right? Why did God send an angel? So the angels could see firsthand what kind of a creation is the human, right? The human is considered loftier than the angels because we have free will, right? The angels would never defy God's will because they're in the presence of God constantly. The humans are much cruder, much more short-lived beings, at least in their human lifetimes, than the angels are, but we have that free will. And it's almost like the fall from Eden, right? The idea that we ate of the tree of good and bad, and we weren't going to be like the angels. We weren't going to be these spiritual beings that live forever, basking in the presence of God. We would be in this world where God's presence is hidden and where we would have a legit choice whether we're going to fear and love God or not. Maybe the angels said, well, in that situation, these crude beings, what are they going to? They're not going to care about you. They're just going to satisfy their hungers. And here Abraham stepped up and said, I will put, I'm willing to give up that which is most dear to me out of love and gratitude and awe of the Creator. And so that was a proof for the sake of the angels, and the angels learned it in that moment. An interesting interpretation I had not heard before, and tied to God saying, "Where are you?" to Adam, and now saying, "Now I know." Perhaps it was the angel saying, "Now I know," in the episode of Akedas Yitzhak. Okay, let's get back to our page. As I said, it'll be a short class tonight. We are holding on page 30. This is going to be page 33 tonight, but we're opening at the bottom of the B side of page 32. We're in chapter 4 of the 8th tractate of the Talmud, Beitzah. These are the laws of festivals. We're 33. I think it has 40 pages, so we're going to be entering the last week of this tractate tomorrow. And here we're concluding our discussion of Mishnah number 7. We learned yesterday that we may not break earthenware in order to create shards, and we may not cut paper on a festival. That's something that could have been done before the festival. And so even if it was going to be used for food preparation, they give the example of cutting paper in order to roast fish on top of it in the oven. So you can imagine aluminum foil or, wax paper, anything like that might be used in food preparation. If you're going to need pieces of that paper, you should cut them before the festival. If you absolutely can't move forward on the festival with the food preparation without having cut the paper already, perhaps, I'm not even sure if this is permitted or not, but if you had to do it and it was permitted, it would, I'm sure, only be permitted by making a shinui, by making in an unusual manner, a non-weekday manner of cutting the paper. And so, for example, sometimes people need a paper towel. They won't cut it on the perforations that paper towels give you, but rather they'll tear it between perforations to show that they would rather not be creating a new piece of paper, right? When you cut a piece of paper, now you have two pieces of paper, and that's why it's prohibited to do that. You sort of created something new on the festival. All right, we continue our discussion of that Mishnah, which also said that you may not prop up a pot with a piece of wood nor a door. Why? What's the issue there? When you're propping up a pot, it's like you're building something, right? And you cannot be in the process of building something. As we'll see, even if you're making a fire, you can make a fire to cook on the festival. How you light it is another question we're going to be talking about. But to make a fire, when you stack the wood for the fire, that's wood stack, right? Stacking wood in a fireplace, for example, that's building a wood structure. And any kind of construction is going to be prohibited on the festival. So what do? You stack that wood in an unusual manner, not like you would during the week. What does that mean? From the top down. What? From the top down? How would you do that? That's almost like, people, there was some fantasy book, right, where people are born at their height, the full height that they're going to be when they grow up, and they kind of are floating through the world, that their eyes at the same level that they will always occupy throughout their lives, and their bodies grow down until they reach the ground when they become adults. How can you build a stack of wood down? And what they mean is you hold a piece of wood at the height where it's going to end up, and then you put some wood below it. Normally, obviously, you put wood and then another layer and then another layer. But to build it in an unusual manner on the festival, you try to, build down, as it were. It was taught in the Mishna, one may not draw two barrels together in order to place a pot on top of them, like two barrels together, and they could be clay barrels, with a fire in between and then a pot over it, right? So you would think, well, you can cook on the festival. Of course you can put a pot over a fire. So what are you talking about? You can't pull these two things together. And it's like, well, you would have some kind of existing structure already for cooking, right? So you could suspend a pot over some fire. But if you draw these two clay barrels together and then there's a fire between them and the pot rests on top, now it's like you've created a structure during the festival that didn't exist before the festival. Rav Nachman said, with regard to large stones of a lavatory upon which one sits to attend to his needs, it is permitted to put them together in the proper manner so that they may be used on a festival. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they're arranging these stones. We were traveling once in India, and people who've been in the third world have seen that, like the toilet, as we understand it in the United States and Europe, is not something that is used all around the world. There's a lot of places in the world where, there's just a hole in the ground and you stand or you squat over that hole. And so perhaps the idea that you would put two stones, next to each other with some space between them, then I guess you would climb up on those stones and then, squat and do your business between the stones. You might think that that's creating a structure and that's prohibited on the festival. But Rav Nachman says, no, that's permitted. Now, Rabbah raised an objection to Rav Nachman. Wasn't it taught that one may not draw two barrels together in order to place a pot on them? This seems to indicate that any arrangement resembling building is prohibited on a festival. So Rav Nachman answered him, there, with regard to the two barrels, it is different because when one pulls them together and puts a pot over the top of them, he creates a tent, right? It's equivalent to making a tent. And it is not the drawing of the barrels close together that is the prohibited construction. Rather, it's the placement of the pot over them, which forms a kind of covering, and that is similar to building a tent, and that's why it's prohibited. But with respect to pulling two stones together, to create a kind of bathroom place, you haven't made a tent, and your body, standing over them is not going to create a tent because, you're just stepping up and stepping down. That has no permanence to it whatsoever. And Rabbah the Younger, so called to distinguish him from the more famous Amora, rabbis of the Gemara period, the Talmudic period, known as, so Rabbah the Younger, not to be distinguished from the famous Amora known as Rabbah, said to Rav Ashi, however, if that is so, then if on a festival one built a solid bench without a gap below the seat, a situation in one does not make a tent, so too will you say that it is permitted, right? So if you build a bench by stacking several stones together to sit on it, is that permitted? No, because now you've engaged in building, right? It's almost like building a wall, except you're using it just for a seating place. But stacking those stones is going to be considered building, and it's prohibited. So pulling two stones near each other so that you can go to the bathroom over and between them, permitted. Stacking stones to sit on, prohibited. What is the difference? He said to, is that permitted? And he said to him, Rav Ashi answered him, the two cases are not comparable. There, with regard to proper construction, such as a bench, the Torah prohibited erecting a permanent construction. But the Torah did not prohibit erecting a temporary construction. The sages, however, they made a rabbinic decree against creating a temporary construction on a festival due to permanent construction. Right? So they're gonna prohibit making something, even though it's temporary, it's not meant to last forever, but still it has some permanence to it, and they're going to prohibit that because people might come to think, well, I was allowed to create this little temporary structure, so maybe I could just add to something that's going to end up being a permanent structure, and to protect people from coming to make that mistake, they decreed against the temporary structure. The sages, however, decreed against creating a temporary construction on a festival due to a permanent construction. However, here, with regard to a lavatory, the two stones that you pull near each other so you can, squat on top of them to go to the bathroom, due to the dignity of the user, the need to go to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom, the sages did not decree with regard to it, right? There, you might think, well, they shouldn't pull stones together because it resembles a temporary construction, and that's too similar to a permanent structure, and we shouldn't do it. But the dignity of the human being who needs to go to the bathroom when he needs to go is so important that we're not going to limit his ability to do that. Rav Yehuda said, with regard to this bonfire, in which wood is arranged in the form of a house, if one arranges it from above to below, it is permitted, as this is not the regular manner of building. However, if one prepares it in the usual fashion from below to above, it is prohibited, for this is considered building. Right? We mentioned it before. You can make a bonfire on a festival, but when you arrange the wood for that bonfire, you can't gather that wood, as we've discussed. That wood already had to be gathered, chopped and gathered before the festival, or gathered and chopped before the festival. You prepared the wood that you were going to use. Now you can make an arrangement of wood to burn for your bonfire, but since you didn't prepare that stack before the festival, you're going to do it on the festival, presumably because like last night's bonfire ran out, and in that same place we need another bonfire for the second night of the festival outside of Israel. So you're allowed to make that wood arrangement for the fire, but you got to stack it in an unusual manner, like building from the top down. It's like put wood here and then put some wood under it. Put some wood here and put some wood under it, as opposed to the normal way of stacking layers, how you would do it during the weekday. And similarly, if one wishes to place eggs on the mouth of a hollow vessel or on a grill sitting above coals, he must first hold the vessel in his hands and put the eggs on it, and only afterward position them both on the coals. And similarly, with regard to a pot placed on barrels, one must hold the pot above the barrels before placing them underneath it. And similarly, in the case of a collapsible bed, whose legs and cover are separate pieces, one must first stretch the upper part and then add the legs. And similarly, in the case of barrels positioned one on top of the other, the upper one must be held in place first and then the others added below. Again, so that it doesn't even come to resemble the prohibited labor of building that is prohibited on festivals and Shabbos. Here you need to do some kind of arranging of objects for the sake of food preparation, but just so that there's no confusion that building would ever be permitted, you do the arranging in an unusual manner. It was taught in the Mishna, and one may not prop a pot with a piece of wood, and similarly a door. And the Gemara asks, with regard to a door, can this enter your mind? Is it possible to prop a pot by means of a door? Rather, right, it said, you may not prop up a pot with a piece of wood and similarly a door. What does similarly a door mean? That you may not prop up a pot neither with a piece of wood nor with a door? Or you may not prop up a pot with a piece of wood, and similarly you may not prop up a door with a piece of wood. And the Gemara asks, with regard to a door, can it enter your mind? How could one prop up a pot with a door? Rather, say and correct the wording as follows. And similarly, one may not prop up a door with a piece of wood. And the sages taught one may not prop a pot with a piece of wood, and similarly a door, as wood is to be used only for kindling. And with regard to any other use than kindling, wood is considered muktzah, and Rabbi Shimon, who does not accept the prohibition of muktzah, permits it. So we were talking about that you would, go out of your way to act in a non-weekday manner when you make an arrangement of wood in order to have a bonfire. And so you might think that, when you prop up a pot or prop up a door with a piece of wood, that what you're engaging in is building. But they've actually changed the subject. What they're saying is, just loose pieces of wood, unless they had been designated as to be used for firewood, they're going to be muktzah, and they're not going to be available for other uses. And even if they are set aside to be firewood, it's firewood that you can use them for. You can't use it as a door jamb or as a prop to keep a pot level that would otherwise be tilted. But that's because of the principle of muktzah, that what's prepared for use and what is set aside from use. And Rabbi Shimon, as we've heard repeatedly, does not hold by the principle of muktzah. The Beitzah continues, and one may not lead an animal with a stick on a festival. But Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, permits it. And the Gemara asks, shall we say that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, holds in accordance with the opinion of his father, Rabbi Shimon, who is not of the opinion that there is a prohibition of muktzah? Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold by muktzah, and he therefore permits one to take any stick and lead an animal with it. And the Gemara rejects this. No, this is not about muktzah. Right now, we were talking about arranging wood and doing it in a non-weekday manner. Then we talked about using a piece of wood to prop up a pot or a door. And we said no, because that's muktzah. Now we're talking about leading an animal with a stick during a festival. And so we're saying, okay, is it the ones who prohibit this are saying no because the stick is muktzah and we shouldn't pick up a stick? But if the stick was prepared from, before the festival for use on the festival for something permitted, it would be permitted. And now they're saying, well, no, that's actually not the issue. The issue here is when you lead an animal through the public domain using a stick as a prod, you are behaving in a weekday manner, like when people lead an animal to the market in order to sell it in the market. The Gemara rejects this. No, there's no issue of muktzah here at all. For in this case, even Rabbi Shimon concedes to the first Tana that this activity is prohibited not due to muktzah, but because one who does so looks like one who is going to the market in the manner of the work week. On a festival, one must therefore lead the animal in an unusual fashion, not with a stick. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shah, kol yihyu b'divrah. Next subject, still the same Mishnah. In a case where one takes a bamboo branch to use as a skewer, was there bamboo in the Holy Land 2,000 years ago? I'm not sure if there was in the Holy Land, but there was within the Persian Empire and specifically in Babylonia. How did it get there? Through the trading that was going on between the Persian Empire and India got the bamboo from China. So these are kind of the migration of plant species. So in a case where one takes a bamboo branch to use as a skewer, right, a skewer for roasting meat, Rav Nachman prohibits it because the bamboo branch is muktzah. Since it was not made into a vessel before the festival started, he may not turn it into this utensil for roasting meat now. And Rav Sheshes permits it. And the Gemara elaborates, in the case of a wet branch, everyone agrees that it is prohibited since it is unfit for kindling and therefore it is muktzah. Where they disagree is in the case of a dry branch of bamboo. And the one who prohibits handling it, Rav Nachman could have said to you, wood is only permitted for kindling during a festival, but it is considered muktzah with regard to any other use. And the one who permits handling it, Rav Sheshes, could have said to you, well, since all wood is to be used for roasting, what difference does it make to me if I roast this wood with some meat attached to it when it is inserted into the flame? And what is it to me to roast with its coals? Just as it is permitted to burn the bamboo as coal, so too it is permitted to use it as a skewer for cooking. And some say a different version of the explanation of this dispute. In the case of a dry branch, everyone agrees that it is permitted because it was prepared to be kindling, and whether you put meat on it or not, it's going to burn in the fire. And where they disagree is in the case of a wet branch. The one who prohibits handling it does so because it is not fit for kindling. And the one who permits it could have said to you, isn't it at least fit for a large fire, which will dry out the branch and enable it to burn as well? And the Gemara concludes, and the law is that the dry one is permitted and a wet one is prohibited. Is that the law? Halacha. One may not pick up a moist piece of wood on a festival in order to use it as a skewer, but one may do so if it is dry and fit for firewood. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7. Now we're going to read Mishnah number 8 and then just share what the law is on this subject. Oh, and then just a little bit of commentary on it. Okay, Mishnah number 8. But I'm almost done, so get your comments in. Mishnah number 8. Rabbi Eliezer says, on a festival, a person may remove a sliver from a pile of straw or from similar material that is before him in order to clean with it between his teeth. Right? The sages ate a lot of meat on the festivals. I don't think that they had dental floss, so they definitely wanted to have toothpicks to get that stuff out from between their teeth. So Rabbi Eliezer says you can use a sliver from a pile of straw or something similar in order to do that. And he may collect straw from a courtyard and kindle it. For anything in a courtyard is considered prepared for all purposes. If it's in the courtyard, you can use it for whatever you want. You don't have to worry about muktzah. The rabbis say, meaning the majority who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, the rabbis say he may collect these materials only from things that were placed before him inside the house. As if they were inside the house, they were certainly prepared for all uses, and then he may kindle them. But with regard to objects lying in his courtyard, as their collection takes great effort, he certainly did not have them in mind for use during the festival. He did not have in mind before the festival that he would use these objects during the festival, and therefore they are considered muktzah, set aside, and you may not even touch them during the festival. And the Mishna states an additional law that is different. One may not produce fire, neither from wood by rubbing one piece against another, nor from stones by striking them against each other, nor from hot dirt, nor from tiles that are struck against each other, nor from water. What? How do you produce fire from water? Brilliant. If you have a round glass bottle, and you put water in it, you can use that like a magnifying glass to focus the sun's rays into a point and start a fire that way. And similarly, one may not whiten tiles with a burning hot heat in order to roast upon them afterward. The key teaching here, this comes up all the time, if you're an observant Jew, and you're thinking about how you're going to cook several meals, especially if you have Shabbos followed by 2 days of Yom Tov, like a 3-day Chag, can you ignite a fire during the festival? We've been talking about over and over again, you can kindle a flame because you can cook on a festival. Yes, you can kindle a fire from an existing fire. You can't start a new fire. In the old world, that really made a lot of sense because starting a new fire, that's quite difficult. I mean, if you ever watch, these survivor videos, how you start a fire in nature, you got to have your Flintstone or rubbing the sticks or how you're going to do it. For us, it seems so easy. You just light a match, or you turn on the burner of your stove. Now, with a pilot flame, that's a different question. I'm not exploring that. Our stove has an electronic ignition. So every time you turn on one of the burners, you're actually creating a new flame. So for sure, you cannot turn on the burners of our stove during the festival because you're creating a new flame. So how do you turn on the burner of a stove from an existing flame? Again, it depends on the kind of stove you have. But what we do is you can turn on the gas without using that igniter. And then what we have is a candle, not like one of these candles that if we left it burning would burn out after 5-6 hours, but you use a yahrzeit candle or something similar, the kind of candle that will burn for 48 or even 72 hours. And so if you needed to turn on the burner, it would be from an existing flame. That's what you do during a festival. When you do candle lighting, it's from an existing flame if it's during the festival, right? And from an existing flame. That is the key, from an existing flame. The law, one may not produce fire. It is prohibited to produce a new fire on a festival, either from wood, stones, or from anything else that is not actual fire already. It is even prohibited to light a match by pressing it against a hot object that is not burning, as this is considered the creation of something new, which qualifies as an item that came into being. No, lad, right? If you created a new fire, you wouldn't be able to use it, right? So that's the issue. Something that is new, it came into being on the festival, as we've discussed a bunch of times, that's nolad, and it's not permitted to use it on the festival. So you can only sort of, create a bonfire, but you can light it from it has to be lit from an existing flame. Likewise, the burners on your stove. And some understand the prohibition of producing new fire as the source for the prohibition on using electricity during festivals. And just finally, a short paragraph. The Mishna said, one may not collect straw from the courtyard on a festival, and the sages taught one may collect materials from a courtyard and kindle a fire because everything in a courtyard is considered prepared, provided that he does not arrange it in piles. Right? Some opinions say you can pick up stuff that's in your courtyard. It's not muktzah, it's prepared for use. But what you can't do is gather it into piles, because that prohibited labor of binding, gathering, that's a prohibited labor. And Rabbi Shimon permits it even in such a manner. Rabbi Shimon would permit you to gather it, but the rabbis overruled him. And the Gemara asks, with regard to what do they disagree? What is the basis of their dispute? One sage, meaning the majority, the rabbis who are stringent, hold it looks as though he's collecting for tomorrow and another day. If you're gathering piles in your courtyard, it would look like you're doing something that is to your benefit even beyond the festival. You're making an arrangement that is for your benefit after the festival. You're only allowed to do labors connected to food preparation during the festival. And that's why it looks like you're collecting for tomorrow and another day, and it is therefore prohibited, so that one will not be suspected of preparing from a festival to a weekday. And the other sage, Rabbi Shimon, holds his pot proves his intention. When onlookers see that he is using the straw for cooking, they will not suspect him of gathering and preparing for something after the festival. And it is taught in the Mishna that one may not produce new fire on a festival in any manner. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? And the Gemara explains, because he creates something new on a festival, and this is similar to an act of creation, and it is therefore prohibited. That's our daf for today. Let's go to your questions and comments. There were no questions about the daf, but much discussion about the Akedas Yitzhak and free will. the binding of Isaac by his father Abraham, and the question of free will as understood in the Torah. Sharon Fran Brooks. But God never speaks to Abraham again after the Akedah. It gives rise to the possibility that Abraham did not sufficiently argue with God to protect his son. I'm definitely familiar with that interpretation. I've thought a lot about that one myself, and like sort of emotionally, I connect with that. It's like Abraham argued with God on behalf of like people he never met before in Sodom and Gomorrah, and said, well, you're going to destroy all the people in these two cities because they're all corrupt. But what if there's, 50 righteous people in those cities? Are they going to perish along with the guilty? And God says, all right, if we find 50, I won't destroy the cities. Well, what if the 50 are lacking 10? What if there's 40 righteous people? And they get it all the way down to 10. If there's 10 righteous people in that city, I won't destroy the city. And I guess there weren't 10 righteous people. And so God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. But why doesn't Abraham argue with God when told, sacrifice your son? I just feel that it wasn't because Abraham was lacking righteousness and in a sense he failed the test. But rather that there was more to the conversation that we know about. I'm not saying we shouldn't question Abraham. We shouldn't challenge this story. We should challenge every story, especially to our own understanding of it. I just think there's so much to be learned from this story. I'm not going to put myself in the position of criticizing Abraham, at least not readily. Afa, we have free will. The one thing God cannot know is exactly what each person will choose. Right, so Rabbi Akiva says, I forget where in the Talmud, he says, everything is known, meaning God knows what we're going to do, and free will is given, right? And so that's a paradox. That's an absolute paradox. If we really have free will, well then, what does it mean that God knows what we're going to choose before we choose it? Isn't God arranging the world, with knowledge of what our choices will be? David Aaron, Rabbi David Aaron, incredible teacher, and I love his books, and I especially recommend on questions like this, his book, The Secret Life of God. We have a recommended books section at accidentaltalmudist.org, and that book is definitely there. This book meant a lot to me in my Jewish journey. I read it early when I was first reconnecting with Torah and Judaism. And one thing that Rabbi Aaron says there is, I think we would all agree that a person, who struggles to become a decent human being and then does so, gains something from that growth and transformation that he wouldn't have if he was born an utterly righteous person. Right? The fact that he grew into a more moral human being than he was, even if he becomes perfect, like it's better that he became perfect than that he was born perfect because he earned that. So would we say that God, who is the utter, the definition of perfection, of a perfect being, that somehow God lacks the ability to perfect God's self? Does God lack the ability to grow because God is infinite and perfect? Right? That's another kind of a paradox. And so what Rabbi Aaron suggests is God has the ability to grow and to increase, his goodness, as it were. How does he have that since he's already infinite and perfect? Through us, right? Through us. We are all a part of God. So the part of God that is cut off from knowing the future and the outcome of things and, all the knowledge that God has, the part of God that is cut off is us. Right? It's like God, each of us is a soul, and a soul is a little spark of God. It's an extension of God. But the way God manufactures these souls, he sort of cuts off a piece of himself and then limits what the soul can know and not know when he sends it into this world. And that's why with this teaching that the soul knows the entire Torah, And then comes right before he's born, the angel comes and taps him on the mouth, and we forget everything that we knew, and we come in as these sort of pristine beings, like as if we were just born. We're old souls, but we don't know anything when we're born. We're struck with amnesia, as it were. And we spend our whole lives as humans trying to remember who we really are, right? And in that way, God has this ability through every one of us to transform God's self, to grow, to learn what was not known before, to better one's self, to make moral choices. God has that experience because God feels and hears and sees everything that we see, hear, feel, etc. God sees, hears, and feels through us, including being ignorant of the future and then seeing it materialize in front of us, right? So that's something that God is able to do through us. God's dynamic perfection, the ability to perfect God's self, happens through us. Lynn, or God knows, but the man does not, so it feels like it was a free choice to him. Absolutely, that's exactly right. And Lucy, in the Jewish tradition, are there fallen angels? If there are, do they not have free will? So the answer is no. That idea of being called Lucifer, who fell, and like in Milton's Paradise Lost, that whole story. We don't have that, right? The Jewish tradition talks quite a bit about angelology and demonology. But demons are not fallen angels. And even, the sort of the adversary, Satan, right? So in English pronunciation, Satan, is not a being that is opposed to God and therefore was given some other dominion to rule over. The adversary is a prosecutor, right? He has the role of the prosecutor. And he, brings our faults before the heavenly throne and accuses us of everything that we did wrong. And worse, because there's no laws against entrapment in the holy scheme. So Satan does function in that way of tempting us to sin so that he can then go back and say to God, see, you said your children are great moral beings, but look how easily they're tempted and they fall. Right? And then God can argue back to his employee, the Satan, and show him that we make atonement, that we do incredible good deeds in this world, and all the good that we do can be held up by God and thrown in the face of Satan. But Satan is not anything but an employee of God. He takes orders from God. And the idea is that all angels are messengers. In fact, the word for angel, malach, in Hebrew is the same word for messenger, right? So the angels, some say, sometimes there are many angels that are just created to fulfill a mission. Other angels kind of have ongoing existence. And there's the myriads of angels who are in the heavenly choir. If there's a rock and roll heaven, they have a heck of a band. There's angels in that band. As well as, all the souls of us who are up there playing in the heavenly band. But we don't have that idea of fallen angels. Demons are something else. And, the Babylonian Talmud actually talks quite a bit about demons, and we'll encounter that and talk more about them when we do. Where are they? Why are they there? So one of the explanations given is that demons are created by our sins. Right? Demons are kind of this residue energy after we commit evil. And that's a scary proposition, right? And it kind of makes sense. That lingering effect of evil that has been done by humans creates a kind of spiritual energy that remains here. And one of the Psalms, talks about the myriads on my, 1,000 on my right and 10,000 on my left. And the Talmud says, if your third eye was open, if you could see how many demons are running around in this world looking to do mischief, you'd be so paralyzed with fear that you could not function. That's why it's a blessing to us that the demons are invisible. But they're there, and we learned elsewhere that they tend to attack people who are isolated, right? Demons will try to kind of overcome a person and sort of, pile on the evil inclination, get that person to do evil. Much easier job for the demons to do when a person is isolated. That's what the sages teach. Don't enter a ruin alone, because demons live there and they will attack you if you're alone. But if you go in as 2 or 3 people, then they're not concerned, right? And, again, instinctively, it kind of makes sense, right? It's like people who are very isolated are more susceptible, to logic that leads to great sin, because they don't have, who to bounce ideas off of, who could show them that you're going way off track, But these are subjects for another day. So that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Monday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a terrific evening.